Hello and welcome back to Zeroing In on Health, the video blog. My name is Charles Washington and thanks for joining me once again. This week we're going to deal with the headline that I saw on MSNBC that says fatty foods may help pilots concentrate. They noted quicker response time, fewer mistakes when flying tied to a high-fat diet. Now, the last time I saw a study that dealt with thinking and cognitive aspects and a high-fat diet, the study would conclude that it makes you stupid and lazy and all this kind of stuff. But here we have one that actually says high-fat diet actually assists pilots in being more effective. So let's take a look at this study and see what's the difference this time. So University of North Dakota researchers found that pilots who ate the fattiest foods, such as butter or gravy, had the quickest response times in mental tests and made fewer mistakes when flying in tricky cloud conditions. Now, it's important to understand what researchers mean when they say fatty foods. Fatty foods usually are any foods that are high in saturated fat, but they also contain carbohydrates. Like when they talk about gravy, obviously gravy, you've got water, you've got fat, and you have flour. So that's a high carb idea. Or French fries, they're considered fatty foods because they're made in fatty oil, but it's a starch, it's a sugar, so it's really a high carbohydrate food, but yet people call these fatty foods. And the researchers do indeed notice that eating a bunch of fatty foods makes people fat, but the fatty foods they're talking about are fatty foods that contain carbohydrates. Foods that are fatty that don't have carbohydrates, such as meat, they don't make you fat. But despite that, these researchers found that high-carb diets trumped high protein in performance tests. What gives? At this point, I should explain to you that many people call an all-meat diet incorrectly a high-protein diet. Actually, nothing can be further from the truth. I eat a diet that's all meat and I drink water. However, that is not a high-protein diet. That's actually a high-fat diet. When you break down meat, all the red that you see is water. If you dehydrate meat, you get down to what's really the protein, and the white part that you see is actually fat. So when you're looking at a piece of meat, just because it looks meaty, the red part, and then there's the white part, you might incorrectly assume that all the red is protein and the white is just fat, and it's really not that way at all. So even a sirloin that would appear lean is actually a high fat diet if you would actually analyze it and break it down. So even on zero carb, our diet is high fat and it's only moderate in protein. We just eat a little bit more protein than what the average is. So anytime you see a high protein diet or somebody making some claim about a high protein diet, you probably can believe it. When the Eskimos, for instance, would eat a high protein diet, they would have what is known as rabbit starvation. That means that when in the springtime, the only thing that would be available would be rabbits. So they would catch these rabbits and eat them, and they're very, very lean with very little fat, and it would usually bring on lethargy. People would be sitting around, they would be really tired, feeling, just lethargic. But when they would add some fat, then all of a sudden their energy would return. So they correctly identified this as rabbit starvation, and they would avoid it. It could cause death after a while because too much protein would build up too much nitrogen and ammonia in your body, which is hyperammonemia, which is a very dangerous thing. So we don't eat a high protein diet, and nobody would want to. And for your own dieting instruction, if you're doing zero carb and you don't have any energy, that's a sign that you need to increase your fat intake. So a closer look at the diets is very instructive. It says a typical meal was simply a thin-crusted extra meat and cheese pizza. That was the high-fat diet. A thin-crusted chicken supreme pizza for the carbohydrate diet, grilled chicken breast with mixed salad greens, fat-free salad dressing, fat-free shredded cheese for the protein diet. As you can see from this, the high-protein diet had no fat in it whatsoever. So it's no surprise to me that people did better with the carbohydrate diet because at least they had fat. It's quite obvious from this study that the researchers here are not aware of what it is that's behind the improvements that they noticed in the pilots. Why are these pilots able to think so much clearer? Why are they able to do things that they can't on the other diets? Fatty acids are what our bodies run on. It's the body's primary fuel, and it's been known since the 1950s. There's no dietary need for carbohydrates whatsoever. Anybody who's been on a zero-carb diet for a long period of time can tell you that increased energy, better cognition, that they're calmer, that they're better able to deal with stress. All of these things we notice on a daily basis. On my discussion forum, people talk about it all the time. I would encourage you to come and read some of these journals, and you can see for yourself. So this is something that In the past, researchers would always say that fatty foods would slow down cognition and all these things. But it will be interesting to see this study if they would actually segregate the food groups, if they could really put someone on an all-meat diet and test them versus somebody on just a high carbohydrate or fatty foods diet as it's used by the researchers. Another book I would recommend to you is Velma Stefanson's book, Not by Bread Alone, which you can actually download from our discussion forum for free. If you would read that book, what you would find is that they did test pemmican, which is nothing more than dried meat and fat prepared in the Native Americans of the Great Plain in their way, the best travel food, possibly the best food in general known to mankind. And they tested this. Many members of the armed services, whether it was the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and many pilots, especially around World War II, they knew about pemmican's history from the fur trade, and they wanted pemmican for their expeditions. And what they found was that pemmican, because it's such a concentrated food, it actually puts very, very little in the stomach, so the waste is not there as it is on a carbohydrate diet. You don't have the smell that you have with carbohydrates. You don't have the bulk and the constipation and all those different issues when you eat a high-fat, all-meat diet. So therefore, something like pemmican, at least for pilots, would have been a great thing. You can read about those studies and what happened and why they chose not to use pemmican as a military ration in that particular book, Not by Bread Alone. I highly recommend it. Once again, this is Charles Washington with Zeroing In on Health, and thank you for joining me for my latest video blog. See you next week.